Awesome. All right, I think we're at 1:03, so I'm going to get started. Thank you everyone for joining us here for Bridging the Gap Between the Giving and the Good, presented by MilkCrate and Virtuous. We're going to get started now with the presentation and looking forward to hearing your questions. Feel free to post those in the chat. Again, the intros that you did are in the chat screen, so feel free to keep putting questions in there throughout the presentation and we can get to those at the end. And we'll have a nice chunk of time for that. And as a reminder, we are recording today. The agenda is we're going to go over the introductions for our hosts, and we're going to, the first part of the presentation is going to be today's donor, Building Systems to Scale Donor Relationships, brought to you by NOAA. And then the MilkCrate presentation focusing on taking nonprofit programs that are offline and bringing them online with some COVID-related examples, as well as some more evergreen examples when times were normal, but still applicable case studies. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So just a little bit about me. I started MilkCrate 7 years ago. It was originally a graduate school program and has now turned into an international tech company serving clients all over the US with staff all over the world. We are heavily focused on serving the nonprofit space and helping them run their programs online and using mobile apps for engagement and tracking. I'm still very involved in the nonprofit world, which was where I got my start. And now I'm on the board of several nonprofits, mostly in the Philadelphia area. When I'm not 30 weeks pregnant and trapped at home on quarantine, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And my contact information is right there as well as on most of my slides. So thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Noah.
Thanks, Morgan. Morgan, I really appreciate you making this happen. And I'm excited because I spent 7 years actually working on the fundraising and development side at a large international relief nonprofit. And the biggest challenge we had was really being able to connect the work we were doing on the fundraising side with the data and the engagement and the interactions and ultimately the stories that the program team was being able to be exposed to. And so I'm grateful that we have a conversation where we have both sides of that coin. And I've enjoyed my conversations with you, Morgan, on like how we need to work better together. So I'm representing more of the fundraising and marketing side of this conversation. I'm a husband and father to 3 boys. They're 7, 9, and 4, and they're going stir crazy in my house here in Phoenix, Arizona. A big thing that drives me and motivates me is really to help organizations kind of engage in authentic ways with their donors and really, as the title of this presentation talks about, really connect the givers to the good and the nonprofit actually be the platform at which that's expressed. This says I was Director of Partnerships and Community at Virtuous. I just recently became the head of marketing as well. So I oversee all of our external relationships with partners like Morgan and so many others that we have in our ecosystem here that's helping us serve nonprofit clients like Mel Schroeder, who's on this call, and so many others. So we're grateful for that community. Next slide. So I want to dig into some of the kind of challenges that we as fundraisers face on being able to use data to personalize how we engage with today's donor. But I first want to start by telling you a story. So this little boy's name is Francis. Francis lives in an impoverished community in the middle of Uganda. I had the opportunity to actually spend time with Francis, but more specifically time with his family. And just like I invite people into my home and want to treat them, not as much now because of COVID, but that idea of hospitality and inviting people in, even though it was in a different context, in a one-room house in a small community in the Ugandan slum, Francis's parents invited me in. And the thing that I learned in that moment is that regardless of where we come from, our backgrounds, our stories, there's this more similarities in who we are than how we're different. In that one moment of connectivity, you can go to the next slide, and the resulting time I've been able to spend seeing in various communities around the world how education can help children actually unlock their potential and begin to, as one program manager called it, dream again. And I get goosebumps still to this day when I talk about it that way. But that one moment really drives so much of me, the work I do today, but also how I give and the charities I give. And the point I'm coming here is not that I'm some humanitarian or that I care about children, but the thing is on the next slide, Morgan, is that this indicates and showcases something that's so, if you can go right back to the last one, this indicates something that's so important to the work that we do as fund developers or as those that are trying to cultivate philanthropy or generosity in our communities, is that giving is deeply personal. And as I was sharing my story about Frances, I imagine you're thinking about the experience that you may have had. And I know Morgan and I have talked about her journey, but each of us have this moment that's kind of guided so much of how we invest and how we give back. And that same story for me, that same story for you, is a story that each of our donors and our contributors have. Yet the challenge is, and this is on the next slide, is that most nonprofits are handcuffed. So giving is personal, but most nonprofits are handcuffed to traditional fundraising systems that are largely impersonal by design. And I want to illustrate that on the next slide. So traditional fundraising is largely impersonal, yet giving is deeply personal. And so this idea is that we have donors coming in with a variety of different sentiments, intents, motivation as to why they're contributing to your charity. You know, Jordan, you're on this call and you work with the Humane Society. Like, there's a reason why, and the reason might differ. It might be that they were invited by a friend. It might be that they've had animals as part of their story for such a long time, and they want to make sure that they're supporting those that are serving in that community. They might just realize that animals actually increase the vitality of like humanity, and that there's an importance there. They may have come through an event, they might have come through a volunteering opportunity, but regardless of how they come in, today's traditional fundraising systems treat everybody the same. And even though there's bright spots like in major donor fundraising, where we're treating every donor in a personal, intelligent way, the majority of donors, if we're honest, are treated impersonally. And we kind of push people through this like sausage grinder static kind of approach where they get the November appeal, they get the January appeal, they get the spring campaign, they get invited to our virtual event, whatever it is. But the result of this approach and this disconnect between how we acquire donors and how we engage and cultivate donors is this huge factor that is a increasing level of attrition amongst new donors. And if you go to the next slide, this is on the back of the fact that most of our efforts are one-to-many and most of them are one way. And the challenge is that that's not helping us bridge the gap with our donors and really build an authentic relationship. And so it's no wonder, if you go to the next slide, that we have somber statistics in our industry. And these haven't changed for the last decade. Is that the fact is that half of donors to the majority of organizations don't give again. And maybe you're above or below this at your organization. But I think, again, if we're giving an honest gut check to our organization, the numbers aren't good. And we're having to really live on this churned kind of wheel of retention and cultivation that results in the majority of donors going away. So we have to fill the top of the funnel, and we have to do more events and do more prospecting and tap into all these different ways to bring more new donors into the fold, to only lose half of them again. And the more sobering statistic here that I found while we were doing research over the last 12 months for the book Gabe published back in March on responsive fundraising was that there's been a quarter, 25% of donors in the last decade have opted out of giving to charities. So we have 25% less donors. So it's not just that we're losing donors and they're moving to another organization. Our approach, in my opinion, is actually driving donors to opt out. And that's tragic. And the reason we're seeing that is based on these statistics of how there's inappropriate asks and impersonal messages. There's a lack of acknowledgement and limited transparency. There's poor and helpful communication. And when you really look at this, and we look at the data from Adrian Sargent, who's an excellent expert on donor retention and cultivation, the summary is that donors that stop giving or donors that keep giving relate back to two variables. The first is that they continue to give if they have a connection with, and the second is that they have confidence in your charity, nonprofit, organization to actually be able to do and serve the cause that they care deeply about. It's about connection with and confidence in. And so our job as fundraisers and our task that we have as organization is to bridge the gap with our donors so that they feel connected with and confidence in our organization. And that's what leads to increased retention. Yet our fundraising tactics don't emulate that outcome. And then we question why this is the case. And so we believe that there's a growing generosity crisis because we're handcuffed to these outdated fundraising tactics. Can you go to the next slide, Morgan? And what we see is that the results or the outcomes are actually a result of our system, not ungenerous donors or changing donors or selfish donors. It's rather every system is actually perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And I hope by now you've kind of seen how there's a disconnect between our tactics and the expectations of donors and the data that says why donors continue to give. And it's connection with and confidence in. So if you go to the next slide. And so that's just the reality. And on top of that, the problem is that it's compounded as the world you fundraise in shifts. So you can go to the next slide. And we've shifted from this like mass marketing to personal and dynamic experiences. You know, Jordan and Morgan and I were joking before the call about this idea that like they're offering, the Humane Society that Jordan's a part of is offering curbside pickup basically for animals and adoptions. Or, you know, I took my dog to the vet recently in the midst of COVID, and they're offering like curbside services. And it's this idea that like our experiences, whether it's in the fact that I'm having groceries delivered to my house, or when I go in to order new groceries, it already knows what I want, or the fact that Spotify recommends other podcasts and playlists that I should be listening to. Like Domino's knows exactly what I should order at this time, and it also recommends what I should watch next based on my viewing history. We have this tailored to you based on your community, two-way behavior-driven experience with most things in our life. And if you go to the next slide, this isn't isolated to these digital experiences, but personalization is actually everywhere. If we really audit our daily experiences, we realize that all of our interactions with the majority of core services, whether it's financial or food or retail or entertainment, are curated and personalized to us. So personalization is everywhere. And if you click over to the next slide, we have to realize that the expectation of today's donor to be personally connected to the cause they care most about is not necessarily driven because there's been this huge shift, but they're mirroring the experience that they're having in the majority of their daily activities based on how they want to engage with their causes. There's a bunch of other factors here, like democratization of information, this kind of innate posture of how our personal interactions should reflect our personal intents. There's a lot of other macro things changing here. But the big part of this is that today's donor expects a personalized connection to causes they care most about because they're being cultivated by the experiences around them in a personalized way. And so this expectation is driven by the exposure they have through other means and other things that they engage with. You can click over to the next slide. And then COVID, which I don't have to really talk much about COVID. COVID has kind of shifted and changed everything. But the reality is that some of these challenges we're facing pre-COVID, flatline retention, sub 50, 25% decrease in the number of donors giving. Now we have a change in the market to personalization, and we have COVID. We can go to the next slide. And this creates this scenario where some organizations are like set up to thrive in this increased chaos, some will be unprepared, and some will merely fight it and lose. And the reality is that we're hoping that through exposure of this information that we can help organizations thrive. And that's why we love the opportunity we have to work with organizations like Mel Trotter, who have leadership that see this and say, hey, we see the writing on the wall and we need to adapt our systems. And this isn't just platforming and technology, but we need to adapt our system, people, processes, and platforms to enable us to be able to engage more effectively with our supporters. That's going to help us emerge from the moment we're in and be able to thrive in the future. So keep going, Morgan. Key insight, fundraising systems. I don't want to beat this up, but basically they were designed for a world that no longer exists. And the reality check of this is indicative because it's not necessarily that you need a new set of tactics, it's that we need to reevaluate the system. So if you go forward a few slides to where my kid's writing a note, keep going. Here we go. So there's some good news here. I skipped a bunch of slides just for the sake of time, is that there are organizations that are modeling this in a different way. And I think the key here is that we have to look at our fundraising through the lens of a child. And that's why I have my child here, is because I think we need to go back to first principles of fundraising and then build from there. Instead of introducing new tactics and strategies and thinking on top of a system that's designed for a world that doesn't exist, we need to start from the bottom up. So let's do some fundraising 101 on kind of what the basics of fundraising are. You can go to the next slide. So the first principles of fundraising is really this idea, in summary, is that our role is to connect supporters with the story that we have. And we do that through a series of systems. So supporters or donors, stakeholders, volunteers, board staff. There could be other supporters or stakeholders there. Your story is your mission, your impact, your purpose, the outcomes, the beneficiaries you're serving. A lot of the stuff Morgan's going to talk about is on the front lines of that. The systems we have are actually bridging the gap, closing the gap between the giver and the good, the supporters and the story. And our systems are what are enabling us to do that. So if we move forward in the next one, the next thing that we have to understand, you can skip the slide. The next thing we have to understand is that there's levers of growth that we can enable to be able to accomplish this so that we can measure the effectiveness of our systems. If we're going to have a system that's bridging the gap, we have to have a series of metrics that showcase how we're doing. What are we doing right? Where is there opportunity for growth? And so we have these basic metrics, and most of you on this call, from what I know, are senior individuals, and so you understand this. Like the core tenets of growth in a fundraising program are acquisition, retention, cultivation, and advocacy. And these are important because we're going to layer those over top of the other first principles. And so if we move forward to the next slide, the question then becomes okay, if we understand these are the first principles, if we're trying to take a systems level thinking approach to how we're going to bridge the gap and rebound from the generosity crisis we're experiencing, what are nonprofits doing to accelerate their growth model and closing the gap with today's donor? What are others doing? And what we've seen, if you go to the next slide, is that they're adopting this idea of responsiveness. And really, responsiveness at the end of the day is embodying what it requires to build deep relationships with your donors. And relationships lead to connection and confidence. And relationship is actually built off of responsiveness. We look at relationship science and dig into the weeds on this. This idea of responsiveness is actually what gives Morgan and I the opportunity to continue to develop our relationship. Jordan and I spent 20 minutes or 30 minutes on a panel discussion together a week or two ago. That was a bridge, but it was this responsive, it's this ebb and flow. And so this idea of a responsive mindset is what's going to enable us, or is enabling modern organizations to begin to bridge this gap. And so responsiveness in theory is a great idea. And I think a lot of organizations will say, yes, I want to be more responsive. I want to build lasting relationships with my donors, but the question is how? And so the next slide really unpacks what we've seen and observed as the tenets that are going to help you be more responsive to your supporters, which is ultimately going to lead to growth. The first is listen. This idea of how you're asking questions, you're finding out why donors have given, you're identifying key signals. The next thing you're doing is you're using this to actually connect in a personal, real-time way. You're using automated emails to actually enhance your ability to do this at scale. You're also suggesting the next right thing. And this is the next right thing for that donor, not the next right thing that you want them to do, but rather what's the next right thing for them to continue to deepen their connection with and in building confidence in your organization to work on the cause that they care deeply about. And this cycle continues to repeat as we learn. And so it's less of a donor pyramid or a donor pipeline, and it's rather about a cycle that we're running through rapidly across our donor base at scale. And so as we think about this, these tenets are what's going to enable us to actually drive responsiveness. And I'm going to unpack this in an example case, and then I want to make sure we have time for questions and transition to how this same approach can actually be taken on the program side and volunteers and beneficiaries. And I'm going to let Morgan kind of handle that. But this responsive mindset is going to enable us to bridge the gap with our donors, but it's also going to enable us to have personalization with our supporters and beneficiaries and volunteers, which are so important to all the organizations on this call. Jordan, I think, mentioned you have 3,000 or so volunteers, 1,000 active working in the shelter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's incredible. And that's a huge stakeholder group that you're trying to connect with your story. And Morgan's going to dig into how technology can help you be responsive on that front as well. And Mel Trotter, I know you all have a huge supporter base as well that's volunteering and being on the front lines, just like, from a donor standpoint, you have huge donor numbers actually supporting your organization too. So let's walk through a quick example here. Morgan, you can click to the next slide. Remember this approach, new donors come in, we kind of have the sausage grinder, for lack of a better word, results in attrition because we're disconnected. Personal on the acquisition side, impersonal on the retention and cultivation side. If you go to the next slide, here's an alternative that I want you to imagine. Imagine for a moment you meet Lisa, who was invited to an event by a friend. In this case, it was a digital event because that's the reality of our circumstances today. But you're actually cultivating her based on that intent, and you're personalizing that engagement throughout. Just like when I engage with Netflix or other brands, I'm having a customized experience in response to that. They're listening for those activities and signals, they're connecting with me, and they're suggesting the next right thing. This is exactly what we can do today. If we isolate down, say, meet Lisa, how would you cultivate Lisa and begin to build connection with and confidence? If you go to the next slide, now imagine if we actually apply this to a variety of use cases. This isn't just a new donor welcome series methodology. This is a multi-stage kind of opportunity for you to think about how should we be responding to donors at various stages of their journey with our organization. What does that look like? You can begin to map out the milestones along the journey that you can begin to think about. How do we engage Tim right now? How do we engage James right now? Rhonda, Lynn, what is the right thing to do? And so if you continue to go to the next slide, Morgan, this idea moves from a impersonal static campaign structure to a responsive dynamic campaign structure. And those dynamic campaigns are actually based off donor identities that then are associated with key milestones along your donor journey, with opportunities for them to continue to build connection with and confidence in your organization as they navigate through that. And the next right step isn't always a donation. It might be an opportunity to connect with program staff. It might be the opportunity to read a story or to learn more details about how you're caring for animals and how you're supporting those that adopt animals. It could be the fact that they want to unpack the impacts of COVID on your ministry and the services that you're providing, those impacted by homelessness. Like, these are all things that are really important for us to consider, and how we're building that connection with and confidence in as we begin to engage our donors. And this leads to, because we've seen it, increased retention, increased average gift, and increased engagement. So if you go to the next slide, it comes back to this responsive mindset is not an all-in. You don't go from impersonal to deep personalization like Netflix and Amazon overnight, but rather it's a commitment to begin to think about how you can listen, how you can connect, how you can suggest, and how you can repeat this as a methodology that you're building off of, that your system is designed to do this well. So if you go to the next slide, you'll kind of see some of the ways that you can do this and begin to adopt this. So what are you listening for? When we say listen, people are like, great, what does that mean? There are 3 core types of donor signals that we recommend you dig into. Typically, organizations are kind of locked in on the involvement column. And so they'll say, yeah, we're thinking about new donors versus old donors. We think about big donors versus small donors. We think about maybe, new or lifetime givers or monthly givers. There's all these different things. RFM, if you're familiar with that, that's kind of what the involvement category is. But what we miss is the opportunity to go beyond that and start thinking about interest. What are they giving to? How are they engaging? What have they expressed interest in? What events are they attending? What emails are they opening? What pages on your website are they visiting? All of this data can actually help inform, again, as a signal on how you should connect with your supporters, when you should connect, and what you should suggest they do as well. And then you move over and beyond that, and you start to get into intent data, where you're thinking about why they're giving. If you go to the next slide, I'll give an example of what this looks like. We did a survey at the international organization I worked for, and we had a series of donors, about 15,000 donors. We were a larger organization, but we had a capacity of these 15,000 donors that mirrored their involvement and their interests. We couldn't differentiate them. And so we asked, why do you give? We wanted to say, hey, we want to dig further beyond because we want to invest in cultivation and retention strategies. Like, what is it? Why do you give to us? And what that revealed was that there was common threads or buckets, or what we call donor identities or personas, depending on what word you want to use, where we basically realized that there were some donors that were giving to us because this was a reflection of their family's value and actually a tool for their family to exhibit the values they were trying to teach and build into their core family. This idea of thinking outside of yourself, serving others. And so it was really a learning tool that we were providing them by giving to our child development programs. The second was a group that basically had the absence of children in their own lives, but a deep conviction and commitment to serve children and the value of serving and supporting children. And so they wanted to give outside of that. This could be people that didn't have children. This could be partners that actually couldn't have children. That was actually a common use case. Or it could have been empty nesters. The third category that we found was that there was this deep macroeconomic reasoning that some of our donors had that said, poverty is challenging, poverty is complex. But we kind of agree with Nelson Mandela's posture on this, that the greatest way to tackle poverty is by investing in the least or the most vulnerable population of children and educating them. And so that's why they were giving to us, because they believed in that, and that's what we did. So one was more of an expression of values, the other one was more of an expression of the absence of physical presence, and the other was a macroeconomic view. And we needed to communicate with that. And we also took those identities and actually expressed them externally. And what we realized is that there was more like-minded people to those individuals. And that intent was the reason that drove them to support our children's program. And we saw growth in that way. Not what we did or why we did, or that you give this amount or that amount, or you're interested in this or not. But it was the why. It was the personal side. Like my story with Francis, and what I saw is that we're all more similar than we really give credit to. And just because our circumstances are different doesn't mean the opportunities should be different. And that's driving me to give to child development organizations, like was with our donor base. So these are ways that you can listen and personalize things. And so you can kind of click through. Morgan, I want to get to your slides. So there's other examples here that we'll share with the slides, but actually, can you go back one more? At the end of the day, you want to layer this thinking on top. So we understand that there's this core framework of that we need a system that connects our supporters to our story. We understand the levers that we can do that through and measure success, acquisition, retention, cultivation, advocacy. Then we have this mindset of responsiveness that's about listening, connecting, and suggesting. And that's going to enable us as a system to be able to engage more personally and build lasting relationships at scale with our donor base. Technology is a huge part of this, but it's not the only thing. Again, systems are the output, or kind of the net value of people plus processes plus platforming. And yes, Virtuous provides the platform, but there's so much more here that we've seen organizations invest in and get success. And so it kind of presents us with a choice. I have the obligatory matrix pill choice slide. Can you change the slides, Morgan? Where you have to choose. Do you want the red pill, kind of status quo, stick with the status quo, or the blue pill? And that there's a new opportunity that we have to kind of engage in different ways with our donors and at least strive towards responsiveness. And this is a choice, if you go to the next slide, that we have as an organization. Traditional, is the data just a byproduct of the work that we do, and that's just how it is? Or is there an opportunity? Do we believe in a future that we can actually be more responsive, personal, dynamic, and connected? And that's how we bridge the gap between the giver and the good. If you want more information on this, if you go to the next slide, just shoot me an email and I'll send you full details on this. I'd be happy to email you back and let you know or answer any questions on this. That's it, Morgan. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of show how we close the gap on the other side.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So I'm wondering, and I kind of already know the answer to this since there's just a couple of you and kind of know, but I like to open up asking who's running a program, whether that program is for volunteers, program beneficiaries, or members. Because often when you hear nonprofit tech, you think fundraising, which is an incredibly important part of the process. But then there's the part that's getting the people who aren't giving you money, but that you're actually serving or helping you do the work, getting them motivated, getting them onboarded, getting them the content they need, and tracking all of that. And that's kind of the space that we operate in. So I always like to know who's in that world, but I think pretty much all of you are. So that's a good starting point. So what I'm going to go over today is just a basic overview of how MilkCrate works, how our technology functions, and who uses it. We're going to talk about some common analog and digital engagement tools that you might already be using at your organization. We're going to do some kind of fundamental demographic reveal of smartphone usage. I think this is often new information for folks. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the difference between custom versus templated mobile app development, because that's a really important thing for people to understand, especially when it comes to cost savings. And then one of the most important things I can ever do is help nonprofits decide when an app makes sense and when it does not. There are many, many times where we've gotten on the phone with a nonprofit that's like, hey, we want an app. And I'm like, great, tell me why. And very quickly I realized that they don't have a good use case or they haven't thought it through. And I want to kind of help you guys make sure that you don't go down a path that's not right for what your goals are. We're going to go into some case studies, both some COVID-related ones as well as some just normal business as usual nonprofit case studies that use MilkCrate, and then kind of close it out. So as I kind of opened with, nonprofits often, you know, when they talk about technology, everyone thinks about donors, but there are two other groups that are very important to a nonprofit. They're volunteers and the people that they're serving or that are a part of that nonprofit. So MilkCrate is really designed for those second two categories, the volunteers and the direct beneficiaries. We are not a fundraising platform. We are a platform that builds mobile apps for the people that you serve or the volunteers that help you do that work so that you can affordably and quickly launch your nonprofit programs app using our platform. So that's that templated versus custom that we're going to get into later. What we've done is created ready to go features that match engagement and tracking needs so that you don't have to figure out what you need. You can just kind of tell us what your goals are and we can work from there, so that you guys don't have to turn into product geniuses. That's kind of our job. And finally, that mobile app pairs with an admin dashboard where you can manage your users, your content, and generate activity reports. So I'm going to give you an example. You know, it's always good to have a story so it helps kind of get clear in your mind. So this is a wonderful organization here in Philadelphia called the Committee of 70. They run a program called We Vote. And We Vote was started several years ago in this very, very basic way. As all good things begin, it was just basically just a simple web page that said, hey, employers in Philadelphia, help us create a culture of civic engagement by signing up to be a We Vote company. And those companies were basically just getting emails with PDF attachments and flyers and things like that that they could post around their office, letting employees know ways that they could be more civically engaged and reminders to vote. Obviously, this was a very one-directional communication channel. There was no tracking of who was doing what. And so it was a very basic kind of program. Wanting to take things to the next level, they engaged MilkCrate to launch the We Vote app. So now every employer that participates in this program has their own team inside the app, and all of the users, the employees, are able to create a profile, and then they see content and activities and volunteer opportunities that they can sign up for to be more civically engaged. There's polls and surveys in there, and it's become a very engaging and trackable program that's serving hundreds of different groups, and it's just been wonderful. Even more important is the actual data that we've been able to track. So most of you are probably familiar with the difference between outputs and outcomes. Outputs are the little kind of bite-sized pieces of data of what got done, whereas outcomes are the things that changed over time that are more like the goals of the organization. So the output that was measured from the We Vote app was 450 instances of voters viewing the voter guide in that previous election cycle, which was an incredibly important number for a Committee of 70 to measure because that's their most important piece of material that they publish every year. And secondly, they were able to see that app users were 50% more likely to vote after downloading the app at least 1 week before the election, which was the most important goal that they had as an organization, was to drive voting. And now they're able to finally measure how their program was influencing that desired outcome. Now, this works across a lot of different types of nonprofits, and we've worked with all of these. So it's not just for civic engagement. It's not just for employer programs. This is for something that, this is a strategy that can work in a lot of different cases, and we'll get into a few of those later. Actually, we already asked that question. So I'm wondering, and feel free to put this in the chat. Have any of you used, I'm sure some of you are using some of these analog things that are in blue at the top. And probably some of the purple ones that are digital as well. Are there any, and the question that I ask is, is there anything here that you wish you could dump? Are there tools that you're using that you either don't understand, aren't serving you well, are too expensive, don't integrate? Because often we find that nonprofits are using a lot of these different things and really struggling with using them or getting what they want out of them and having it be an efficient process. Anybody? All right, that's fine. We can just keep going. So as far as accessibility of mobile, that's a question I get all the time. It's like, well, who has a smartphone? Who are we going to reach? Is there a magic bullet to reach everyone in my program all at once? Because some people, their email, they don't like email or it goes to spam. When you try and call people, they don't want to talk on the phone. Social media stinks because when I post something, only 2% of our followers see it unless I pay for an ad. So there's all these kind of barriers. And so people are always asking, is there one simple way to reach everyone? And the short answer is no. But the good news is Americans of all ages are increasingly likely to mostly go online using their smartphones. And the majority of Americans have a smartphone. And not just the majority, every single demographic, age, race, education, and income, 71% or higher have a smartphone, with the one exception of 65 and older for that age group. So as you can see, this is an overwhelmingly accessible medium. And when people are worried that, oh, well, if we try and do a mobile-focused engagement strategy with our volunteers, they're not going to have smartphones, or, oh, the parents in our program, we don't know if they have reliable, access to a smartphone. They do. The vast majority do, at least. So it's not going to be a silver bullet, but it's definitely a smart strategy.
A presentation. I gave the first half.
Sorry, no?
Oh, no, sorry. I was telling one of my colleagues something. My bad.
Oh.
That wasn't on mute. That was my mistake.
No problem. So now I try and summarize in this very simple slide, when does a mobile app make sense? And this kind of, the best way I can explain it is if you need consistent engagement from a group of people who are supposed to be doing something on a daily, weekly, several times a month basis, and you want to know who's doing it and when, that behavior data, maybe what are they achieving or what kind of progress are they making, that's when a mobile app with activities and communication features like we offer makes sense. If you don't need those things, then it doesn't necessarily make sense. And there can be different solutions that we could suggest from other providers that, whether it might just be a mobilely responsive website or, a client management tool or a CRM, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But these are the things that if you have these goals, that's when it makes sense. Breaking it down a little bit more, if your goal is to better engage your program participants and track data, that's number one. But then there has to be a value to all the stakeholders involved. First stakeholder is the end user, right? That volunteer, the program participant. So an example would be, we're going to give the example of the Read by Fourth app in a little bit, when volunteers used to have to carry around a 4-inch binder. Now they don't have to carry that around anymore. They just have the app right in their phone. So that was a benefit to them. It made it easier for them to participate. We had another program where volunteers had to sign in on a sheet and keep a log, and often they would forget to do that, versus being able to do it with one touch on their phone made it easier for them to log in and track the kids that they were working with. There also has to be significant value to the staff because they're the ones that are going to be implementing and relying on this tool. So it has to make their jobs easier. So those volunteers who used to fill things out on a sheet, the staff used to have to type that all in and decipher the various levels of clarity of handwriting, and it would take hours out of their time. And so being able to eliminate that made the tool more valuable. And finally, the funders have to see value in it. They get to see that the program is actually achieving what it set out to do. Like in the case of WeVote, you could actually see that people were more likely to vote. And if you as a funder are really invested in that outcome, then you're going to be really excited to keep funding a program like that. Now, for those of you who maybe have explored whether a mobile app makes sense, you may have come across some barriers, like how much time is it going to take? How much money is it going to take? And do you have the expertise to even handle a project like this? So this is where I want to kind of explain the difference between custom apps and templated apps, because if you're not in the tech world, this might not make a ton of sense. But just like when you purchase a CRM subscription, you're not hiring a team of engineers to build something from scratch, right? You're signing on to a trusted provider who has built something that lots of different clients are using and relying on and are paying a lot less for something that they don't own, but they have a license to, right? And that's basically how MilkCrate works. Is instead of this being some bespoke, custom-tailored suit app, it is a very high quality but off-the-rack kind of experience. And that's the way that you can make things move faster, more affordably, and be tailored to your needs. So having a mobile app that costs 1/10 of what it would be to build from scratch, having the right features for nonprofits' needs, and being able to launch something in weeks or months instead of years. These are all the benefits of working with MilkCrate versus trying to build something from scratch. And it's what makes us really, really different and unique in this space, is that 90% of the technology out there is focused on fundraising, and there's basically nothing else that's making this kind of engagement and tracking for these types of groups possible. And it's our passion to make it affordable and accessible to nonprofits. Some of the templated features that you can pick and choose from are things like an events calendar or push notifications, location check-in by GPS, polls and surveys, being able to segment your users into different groups, and being able to share different types of content. And we're actually going to be adding badges and levels, so you'll be able to have people progress as they complete different types of activities, seeing them progress with badges and things like that. Now, the way that it works from a user's perspective is they're able to download the app, create a profile, and join a segment, and then they're off and running and starting to earn points by completing activities. And all of this is branded based on your organization's brand, your content, your everything. And then the admin dashboard, where you can actually see the data of what is being accomplished by your volunteers or your program participants over time. Now, I'm going to get into a couple of case studies, and then we'll break for questions. So this client, actually, we checked in with all of our clients right when quarantine happened to see how we could help them even further transition to digital, since we knew that was going to be important, and that's kind of what we're set up to do. It was pretty cool to hear Diego from Inner City Capital Connections say how excited they were. They already had a digital platform in place. They felt like they'd kind of been able to avoid some of the pain of having to suddenly scramble. But it has been, it's been a transition, and it's been something that having this in place has meant that they didn't have to suddenly cancel all their in-person things. They could just shift that content into the app. So that was pretty cool. This is a client that we've been working with for a number of years now, the Free Libraries Reading Captain program. And this was the one I mentioned where volunteers used to carry a 4-inch binder. And a lot of these volunteers are seniors, so that could get kind of heavy. Excuse me. So volunteers would go door to door talking to parents about how to help their kids get on grade reading level. And they had a bunch of different resources organized by the age of the child. So they'd have to flip and find the right section, then take notes about what happened and what the parents shared with them. And it was a pretty paper intensive and, reporting intensive process. Now with the mobile app, all the resources are organized right at their fingertips by age. And every time they click on something and share something, they know that that's been done and is instantly tracked in the back end. So all of the information of what volunteers are doing, what work, in which zip codes are now organized and tracked in the data dashboard instantaneously, which makes it much easier for the program managers to see what's happening and report on it. Now, this is a very COVID-related example. Jersey Cares was tasked with helping volunteers find senior or fulfill grocery orders for seniors so they didn't have to leave their home. And they reached out to us and said, we need something, and we need something now. And so we were able to launch an app where the volunteers could claim an order from a senior and have the grocery list there. And then as they dropped off the groceries, they can take a picture as well as a picture of the receipt, and everything gets tracked and is transparent. So it made it possible for this very fast response program to go live in record time to fulfill this very important goal of serving seniors and keeping them safe. Now, this is a client that we've been working with for a while that had to pivot because of COVID. Now, they're called the Youth Volunteer Corps, and it's a program where teens are given opportunities to volunteer throughout the city, all in person. Now that they can't do in-person work, the teens are given opportunities through the app to do digital service. So some of the things they came up with were writing cards to cancer patients using digital communication like e-card systems. They challenged the kids to do a plastic audit in their homes of how much plastic and what types, so that they could kind of think about how to be more environmentally friendly. So they're finding ways to take the existing technology and the mission of the organization and shift it slightly so that the content is friendly for a quarantine environment while they're still, as long as that lasts. And finally, this is a case study that has nothing to do with coronavirus. It's just another example of a program we work with, Philly Startup Leaders, where the app helps streamline communications for the accelerator participants, making event dates, homework assignments, and surveys all accessible in one place, as Kiara Smalls explained for her testimonial about us. So that was really nice. So in closing, just to kind of summarize, because we are a fairly new and innovative way of helping nonprofits, we want to make it really clear what we're trying to accomplish. So at the end of the day, what we want to make happen is when funders give a nonprofit money, that nonprofit, if they're running a program, can build their own customizable mobile app using the MilkCrate system, deploy it to their end users, and have their users, whether they're volunteers, program participants, or direct beneficiaries, use the app to make it easier for them to participate, log their hours, receive content, chat with a mentor, etc. All those important functionalities all in one place. And that every time they do something, it becomes tracked data that can be turned into outcomes and outputs and outcomes data that helps you go back to your funders and say, look, we ran an efficient, effective program. Here's the data. Keep funding us so that we can continue doing good work in the world. So thank you so much. We're now done with the slides and kind of introducing ourselves to all of you. We have about 12 minutes to kind of keep the conversation going. I'm also going to share with all of you in the chat window, since you're now very adept at using chat, the survey. So we would very much appreciate you filling that out. We'll also send it in an email, but feel free to get a head start on that. And Jordan asked, can you share these slides via email? Absolutely. So we ask that you fill out the survey, and then we will send you the slides. It's our way of making sure we get feedback and can continue improving the program. So please do fill out the survey, and I'll happily send you the slides as well as the recording. And with that, I'm going to just stop recording so that we can have a nice short little video, and then we can answer